Hello and welcome to Hanratty on Karate. I'd like to carry on with my little bit of history, and we're going to follow on from where we discussed where it came from with the Tosu and the Zato, and then on into the Japanese style of karate, which is prevalent, JKA. Now, World War II did a lot to damage the progression of karate. Funakoshi had come over to Japan, introduced his style of karate, which essentially was Shorin-ryu. And Funakoshi, being a Confucian scholar and a gentleman, emphasized the do part of karate, the way you live your life. Essentially, he was what we would call a Confucian gentleman. Now, to get karate off the ground, so to speak, it started to draw attention in the universities. It was put into the universities as a recreational sport, not part of the curriculum, but as extracurricular. Kind of like if you were on a team, there was certainly no Shotokan scholarships in the universities, but they had teams, captains, and so on. After the war, Japan was in a very sad state. As you can imagine, it was an occupied country. They'd lost the war. They'd lost hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of citizens in fire bombings and, of course, atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And a lot of karate instructors also went missing. There's a story, and I'm not sure how true it is. This is in Okinawa, and 3 karate instructors trying to do their best in really hard times. I mean, economy was through the floor, inflation was roaring away, and unemployment was endemic. And these guys, they were karate instructors, and they thought they'd make a few pennies putting on demonstrations. Now, at that time, they only knew 3 kata. So once you do your 3 kata, what do? So they kind of made up some katas to go along with it. And so they increased their repertoire, and then they did some light applications of katas and stuff like that, basically togumi rather than tode. So that was how bad it was. Now, when you get to Japan, we also had the same kind of unemployment and economical stress that was endemic in the whole nation, being a conquered nation. And there was a number of instructors got together. Now, this was practically all they could do. Even though they may have been university graduates, there just wasn't places for people with economic degrees or whatever they had. And they decided they wanted to teach karate professionally. Now, there was an opportunity for them to do this by teaching the occupation forces. And the main occupation force that they concentrated on, was a little bit fortunate as well, was the SAC group, or the Strategic Air Force Command, which was kind of like a specialized forces, almost like Green Berets or SAS or wherever you. They were the elite of the American forces. And the general who gave the go-ahead for this, actually kind of ironic, because he was the guy who'd actually ordered the bombing of Japan that destroyed Funakoshi's dojo, the Shotokan. But anyway, he wanted to get his troops more and more elite and introduce them to martial arts that was effective and make them more effective in one-on-one. And he'd seen some demonstrations of Japanese police methods, which contained aikijutsu and some karate in there. So this group of instructors, they formed the JKA. JKA was formed not long after the war, and it kind of stumbled along for a little bit. and it didn't really take proper formation until 1949. Now, the other group of senior instructors from Funakoshi's group, Igami and Hiranishi, they didn't like this. They didn't think that karate should be commercialized. You kind of get a sense of this these days with some karate schools saying, no, we're traditional, we don't like the commercial side of it and all that. It's half and half. If you're running a dojo, you have to charge a fee. Like, I run a non-profit dojo. I have run a non-profit dojo for almost 45 years now in Calgary, where I live. And we managed to plod along. Given the way that I've set up the finances in the dojo, it'll be there forever. That's just the way I've got it set up. And it is non-profit. Probably got the lowest fees of anybody around. But anyway, I'm not pushing my dojo. I'm just saying that's the way I've set it up. Now, the JKA was set up, and straight away, they wanted to bring in something that would highlight their association, and they still wanted to teach what they considered traditional karate, but of course it had a Japanese flavor, and the Japanese flavor they believe they gave to the original karate, or Tode, was the Budo spirit. And some conversations I had with Nishiyama in the 90s when I was doing some interviews for Terry O'Neill's Fighting Arts, this is what Nishiyama, who was one of the founders of the JKA and one of the original instructors, this is the way he explained it, that the Japanese gave to karate what they called the Budo spirit, and this kind of elevated it somewhat from the normal Tode self-defense thing that karate was supposed to be in its original form from Okinawa. And also they wanted to keep hold of the Do, the way of life, the vehicle that you can ride on through your life, if you like, which I consider that's what I've done. Even though I've earned a living doing other things, I've always had karate there, and I've always trained, and I've always practiced. So JKA was formed, and it was formed in 1949, and Nishiyama and a number of other instructors all got together. Now, I can give you the names, but if you look it up, you can find out for yourself. It's probably worth doing if you're this interested. But it's really interesting. They didn't get government approval for a few years, and they drew up a constitution which Nishiyama's father was instrumental in doing, as he was a lawyer. Nishiyama had an economics degree from Takashuko. The university that you came from here really started to influence which side you went to, either the Shotokan or the JKA, or the Shotokai under the Funakoshi seniors like Igami and Inorashi. So because Takashuko was looked upon more as a blue-collar university, and Keio and Waseda were considered a little bit more for gentlemen, if you like. There was a little bit of, I wouldn't say animosity, but maybe just a little bit competition, like there would be with Oxford and Cambridge, say. It's minute, but it was there. So the Keio Waseda group under Igami and Hiroshi, they formed the Shotokai, and they had Funakoshi's son, Yoshida, as the head of the organization. And these were the people who considered themselves true to Funakoshi and true to his ideals, original ideals. And they considered the JKA to be a little bit commercial and a little bit rough, if you like. This caused, as I mentioned before, a great deal of animosity, especially when it came to Funakoshi's passing in 1957. Funakoshi passed, and JKA demanded that they would organize the funeral. But Yoshida Funakoshi, Funakoshi's eldest son, surviving son, wanted the Shotokai to organize the funeral. And what happened was the JKA actually boycotted it, which was unfortunate, and it caused a lot of animosity amongst the two groups. So the Shotokai carried on their own way with the Gami and Hironishi, and the JKA with Nakayama and Nishiyama and Okazaki. And I believe Nakahara was the first president that they had. Now you can check up on this yourself if you want to. But they formed a JKA and they got incorporated as a corporation, I think, in 55. In 57, they held their first tournament. Now, bear in mind that Funakoshi never did agree with tournaments. And actually, in later years, when speaking with a number of senior JKA instructors, they also don't agree with tournaments. But I think my belief is they feel them necessary in order to promote karate throughout the world. You need something to showcase what you're doing and what you can do. So in 57, we have the first JKA tournament, and that was won by Kanazawa. And he actually, believe all the stories, and yeah, there's photographs around, he fought the tournament with a broken hand. The story goes that he was going to pull out, and his mother asked him why, and he said, well, I've got a broken hand. And she said, well, is karate just only works if you only have one hand? And he thought about it, and he thought, no, I can do this. And so he did, and of course he won. Now, a few people think that I'm anti-JKA because of the way I'm putting these views forward. I'm not. I was JKA for a long time, for about 20, 25 years, when I first, even more actually, when I first started karate right up until I left the JKA. And it wasn't so much leaving the JKA as leaving the instructor that was also leaving the JKA in 1990. But I was JKA, I admire them. I think they did a fantastic job in spreading karate around the world. And the karate that they teach and they put forward is superior, in my belief. I wouldn't be doing Shotokan if I didn't think that. Having said that, there's a lot of horror stories came back from people who went to the JKA instructor courses. Like Stan Schmidt from South Africa described it as the hornet's nest. It was a lot worse than that. There was people getting quite serious injuries. And there's many books on training at the JKA Hombu. One of the best is written by a Canadian guy, C.W. Nicol from Vancouver. One of the best books I've ever read, called Moving Zen. You find most of the non-Japanese people who went and trained at the Hombu were pretty big guys and could look after themselves as well. But the attitude, every one of them came back with the same opinions. The attitude was when you walked into the JKA Hombu, it was almost like they were sizing you up as fresh meat. And this was their way of testing themselves. And it was almost anything goes. There wasn't much in the way of control techniques. You get this back from not just myself. I mean, if you look at guys who've come out through the instructor school, Richard Amos, for example, Dave Hooper, and people who've been there, like Dave Hazard and these people, they all come out with the same kind of horror stories of people getting beat up and stomped on and headbutted and all the rest of it. And there was some instructors that were just sadistic. Yano comes up in a lot of stories, his name. And even Yohara, when asked why was Yano the way he was, he said, I don't know. That's just the way he is. And he said he probably doesn't even know why he is the way he is. So, and Yohara is one of the hardest fighters around, and some of the techniques he brought out were just amazing. He actually could use these techniques in the streets. Yohara Sensei had a security company, private security company. If you look through some of Richard Amos's stuff, you can see some videos of Yohara showing what his company could do. And Richard does some great demonstrations with Yohara, and always ended up full of bruises. And a friend of mine I know who went to Japan, just after I got to Canada, actually, I met this guy, and we trained together in Calgary. and he was talking about going to Japan. He was a big guy. He's back in Calgary now, back in Canada rather. And he went and trained with Tanaka, actually produced a really good videotape of his time with Tanaka, trained at Hombu, and then all of a sudden a letter came out from Nakayama saying that all his grades were nullified, they weren't recognized, and wasn't welcome in the JKA anymore. And I could never get the complete story, but from very good friends of his in Japan, you have a senpai-kohai relationship. And basically, if you're a junior and you're fighting with your senior, you just have to take what he's doing. He can use you as a punching bag, training partner, or Bob the dummy, whatever he feels like. And some Westerners don't like that. And you read C.W. Nichols' book, he lost it once, slammed the guy on the floor and put his head through the wall. This happened to a great many guys who were quite capable of it. And from what I've heard, this happened to this friend of mine, Malcolm Fisher, who was subsequently banned from the JKA because he retaliated against his senior senpai. But this was the kind of training that they were doing in Japan, which differed greatly from the training that we were being offered in the West. We did all the same kind of things, and while I was with the KGB, we were JKA affiliated, of course, with Sensei Hanratty as our head. Originally, we had Sensei Hanratty and Sensei Kanazawa, but Sensei Kanazawa moved on, started his own group with Shiro Sano, another JKA instructor, really good karate man. And they produced some amazing people, like Aidan Trimble and people like this. But my background was under Hanratty and KUGB. Now, KUGB came originally out of Vernon Bell's group, which was the British Karate Federation. They originally brought in a Japanese instructor. I can't really remember his name now, but I was supposed to do an interview with Vernon, but unfortunately, by the time I got time to go over and see him, he'd passed, so that didn't happen. But I do have all of his books. They were sent to me. He was kind enough to send me his books. So I have a good background and a good history of what Vernon did for karate in England. Now, it wasn't only Hanratty and Kanazawa that came to England to teach. Shirai went to Italy, Kase went to France, Oishi went to Germany. So they spread around. Before this, they'd all been on tour, I think in the 60s, 65, and it seems to stick in my mind, when they went on tour and did demonstrations all around the world, and they did friendly matches. Like Nishiyama, for example, seeing the success of the JKA instructors courses, he instituted an instructor course in California, which was attended by some really good American karateka, like Ray Dalkey, James Feard, Greg Golden, Frank Smith. All of these guys, they all went through his instructor course, which was really strict. They had to put papers in every month, and from that they had to show up in a suit and tie every morning, 9 o'clock, you couldn't be late, and the training was pretty much standard JK instructors class. So Nishiyama, I say, was very instrumental with the JKA, and what kind of caught my eye, and I don't know if anybody else has noticed, is I have Nishiyama's original book, which he wrote with Richard Brown, called This is Karate. It's an extremely good book, very comprehensive, really well thought out, because when the JKA started teaching the SAC groups, or the Special Strategic Air Command groups, they were teaching Westerners, and Westerners, unlike Japanese, didn't just want to know how. You know, this is how you do a block, this is how you do a punch, do 500. They wanted to know why. And so what happened is the JKA instructors had to get a lot more technical, and they had to study body mechanics, basic physiology, what's happening when you do this? What is the reaction of the human body to this and that? And so it got a lot more technical, and they got a lot more in-depth with what they were doing. The physiology behind it became a lot more important because people wanted to know why. And they have every right to. I mean, if you're going to do something, you want to know why. That's just the Western mindset. You can't just do it because it's tradition. Although in politics these days, you're going to get that. I mean, I'm sure there's American school kids who have to put their hand up and do the Pledge of Allegiance every day, would like to know why. And I don't think that the explanation might just satisfy them these days anyway. Why do you have to sing the national anthem at every football game or every baseball game or whatever, every hockey game? I don't know why. I don't think it's needed. You've got pride in who you are and who your country is and everything else. That should be good enough. But I digress. Anyway, through Nishiyama's book, This is Karate, and I've got the original rice paper bound edition, he doesn't mention Nakayama. And Nakayama was the head of the JKA, and he was the head instructor. However, you go through that book, Nakayama's not mentioned. So anyway, just a thought. So Nakayama did a great job. He was a gentleman. I was lucky enough to train with him a few times at seminars when he visited North America. Trained with him twice in the US and a couple of times in Canada. Once at Nishiyama's camp in LA. Very basic training, but you had to be correct. But at the same time, if you're teaching like 200 or 300 people in a row, you're not really going to get individual attention. You're not going to get your mistakes corrected or something like that. The way you correct mistakes, if you don't block a punch is going to come in and hit you. That's probably the best teacher you've got. Payne is a great teacher. So, as I say, they weren't really that technical. They'd show a technique, and that would be it. And he had with him a guy who had amazing kicks, Suyama, but he was kind of a big guy, but loosely built, if you know what I mean. The muscles just seemed to be there, very relaxed. And so his kicks were really just, he put his foot up and do it. Now, I had no doubt he'd done it 5,000 times, and that's why it looked absolutely effortless to us. But I was quite impressed with him. And a couple of times he came with Ueki, who took over chief instructor of JKA later on, much later on. So Ueki was quite impressive, and I was lucky enough to have Ueki visit us in Calgary many years ago. He was just sightseeing, but we did, Nishiyama had phoned me up, asked me to pick him up at the airport, and went and had a few drinks and stuff like that. But anyway, these people were very impressive, but they did it every day. It was their living. It was their profession. And as I say, they used to look on non-Japanese coming into the dojo as fresh meat. And the JKA did a fantastic job, and I'm not anti-JKA, which some people think I am. I'm just not a part of it. But I do admire the job they did in spreading karate throughout the world. What happened when Nakayama died was extremely sad, and it just shows you what politics can do to a very successful organization. When Nakayama died, they tried to run it by committee, and there was two factions really. There was the Matsuna faction, and then there was the Nakahara group. Now, it took quite a lot of time and litigation to get this sorted out. In fact, Nakayama passed away in 1987, and I was lucky enough to go to his memorial down in Denver at Yaguchi Sensei's dojo, which was very well attended by Tanaka and just a whole bunch of Japanese instructors. And we held a memorial competition for him there. It was great. I just enjoyed it. They were a nice bunch of people. At that time, I was still in JKA, so I was quite welcome. Although at that time, the ISKF was being formed under Okazaki and Yaguchi, and they were rather closed-minded. And they still are today. If you train in ISKF, they don't want you to train anywhere else. And if you come into ISKF, well, actually, I don't think they let anybody in from outside. You have to become a member, and then you have to regrade with them and all the rest, which at my age I'm very reluctant to do. So what happened with the split, that you had the two factions and an internal split, they wanted to bring Nakahara in as the chief instructor, and this was opposed by the Asai group, okay, the Matsuna group. So you had the Nakahara group, of course, they wanted Nakahara to be chief instructor. So it went into litigation. Now, it wasn't settled until 99, okay, so it's quite a long time after, almost 11, 12 years after. And the Asai group lost the civil suit, or whatever it was. And so the JKA reformed with Nakahara as the head, and Ueki came after him. And so on it went. Now, at that time, they'd started to drop down, and we have all these little splinter groups that took away from the JKA membership. And it was mostly because of people were quite disgusted that politics had come into it, when this was supposed to be karate do, the way of life. And we were there for the training, we were there for the spiritual, if you like. And that's what we were all looking at. That's what I was looking for. What attracted me to karate was the fact that it gave me peace of mind. It made me feel if I could work past a certain kata, or I did a kata well, or I did my kumite well, and I didn't have to win. I just had to know what I could do to control my opponent. I thought it honestly made me a better person, or a different person, one that I could accept rather than just pushing on with my life in the accepted form. You know, eat, sleep, work, die kind of thing. So a side group split off and they formed what is now the JKS. And Asai was very eclectic. He studied quite a lot of Chinese forms. And if you ever see any videos, and they're on YouTube, of Asai fighting or doing demonstrations, it's almost white crane based. And, you know, he does a lot of jumping techniques and stuff. And he also introduced Junro Kata. Now, he has quite a famous student called Andre Bertel, who kind of pushes on his style. And the JKS still incorporates the Junro katas in their curriculum. Now, the Junro katas are there to, how can I say, they want to show movement through different forms rather than the straight JKA forms like Taisabaki. They bring in a lot more spinning techniques. They focus more on nekoashi and fast, light movements. So Sensei Kagawa, now a very famous Japanese instructor, heads the JKS. And they're a really strong group, and there's a lot to attract a student to the JKS. And if you wanted to study karate, you could go a lot worse than doing a JKS curriculum. I would advocate the JKA curriculum myself, although I do have some issues with some of the little differences that they bring in, and they're brought in, I think, just to be different. Okay, so anyway, Nakahara group, they prevailed for the JKA, and JKA slowly started to build up again. And then under Ueki, they built up further and they got better. They still run their instructor's course, and they still have lots of foreign students going to their dojo. I myself attend their dojo almost every time I visit Japan, which is probably annually. And now they have Nagaki as a senior instructor at the JKA. And there's nothing wrong with all of these groups, but there's just little differences and little things that niggle at you. So one of the things that niggled at me with the JKA was when Sensei Hanratty passed in 2003. I was quite close to Hanratty Sensei. I was in Worcester at the time, vice president of Worcester, and I would over to the UK to attend his memorial at Crystal Palace, like many Shotokan people did. See all my old friends from the KGB. And JKA actually posthumously gave Sensei Hanratty, promoted Sensei Hanratty to 9th Dan, which was very nice of them. However, the KGB was probably the largest JKA group in Europe at the time, and it had some very senior Western instructors. Some of them maybe not so popular now, but definitely Andy Sherry, Terry O'Neill, Bob Poynton, Billy Higgins. All of these people were all senior instructors. Now, Sensei Hanratty's assistant, if you like, and he'd had many assistants because I'd been to Crystal Palace camps for many years, and so even when I moved to Canada, I still went back for camps as long as they didn't clash with the Nishiyama camps. And usually they didn't, because Hanratty used to come to the Nishiyama camps as well at La Jolla. But when you passed, JKA wanted to put Obata in charge of the JKA in England. And the KUGB didn't think that was right. They thought JKA were just being the JKA and trying to impose their, I would say, xenophobia. And I'm probably right, because that's what they are. The Japanese, it's a xenophobic familial society, so it's family-based and seniority-based, but they just don't take to foreigners. So they wanted to put Obata in charge. Now, there was some English people that agreed with this, and because we have Japophiles everywhere, the same as you have everywhere else, but it's more prevalent in karate, I think, than most other places. And there's not a lot wrong with it. You're going to get good instructor, but these people were senior, and they'd been senior for many years. They'd had way more experience than the guy that the JKA wanted to put in. And so the JKA put him in, so KGB en masse left, right? They left the JKA, which is the same as Okazaki's group, ISKF, left the JKA. So they just left en masse. And just lately, I saw a letter from the JKA saying that none of their members should be involved with the organization of ESKA. Now, ESKA is the European Shotokan Karate Association. It was started 2 years before WUSKA, of which I was a founder member, and we didn't have a problem with anybody. The KUGB was one of the largest groups in ESKA. It still is. It's also one of the largest groups in WUSKA. I can't see why JKA would want to ban anybody from ESKA unless it's just purely because it realizes that the KUGB is the largest member, and the KUGB did not bow down to accepting a Japanese instructor. Now, I may be wrong, and I'd like, if you've got any proof, any other opinion as to why they are banning ESKA, I'd love to hear it. But that's JKA. As I say, I'm a great admirer of them. I practice JKA-style Shotokan karate. I always will. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there, leave you to your own thoughts and conclusions. Thank you.